So with this, I'm very, very honored to introduce the great personality here joining us today, Justice Madan B. Lokar, the man who spearheaded the visionary move of setting up juvenile justice committees in all high courts and also headed the one in Supreme Court of India. Justice Madan B. Lokar is currently serving as a non-resident judge in the Supreme Court of Fiji. Justice Lokar has also served as a judge at the Supreme Court of India from June 2012 to December 2018. He also served as the acting Chief Justice of the High Court of Delhi, Chief Justice of Guwahati High Court, and Chief Justice of Andhra Pradesh High Court before being elevated to the Supreme Court. His other areas of interest have been judicial reforms, computerization of courts, judicial education, legal aid and services, juvenile justice, and alternate dispute resolution. Justice Lokar is known for his far-reaching verdicts on human rights, particularly rights of children, women, and victims of state and extrajudicial violence. So very, very warm welcome to you, sir, and the space is yours. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you to Firki, Haq, and Arpan for giving me this opportunity to share a few thoughts. Today, of course, is World Children's Day, but we also had Children's Day on 14th of November. That is our first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru's birthday. So really, unfortunately, the kind of importance that was being given to Children's Day maybe about 20, 30 years ago. I remember when I was a child, it used to be a great occasion, to celebrate Children's Day. There would be all kinds of competitions, sports, painting, this, that, and the other. But now, with the changing times, we have, started discussing things like, child sexual abuse, POCSO, things like that. So things have really changed over the last so many years. But anyway, I think we have to get on with life, and if there are problems, we have to deal with them as and when they come. I know that the theme of today's program is child safety module, and the concentration really is on child sexual abuse and POCSO. But I would like to give it a far broader dimension than just limiting it to child sexual abuse and POCSO. The reason is that children are facing all kinds of problems today, many of which were, of course, not anticipated. Something like COVID. COVID has created a huge amount of problems for children in terms of education. Many of them are not able to go to school because of COVID. Many of them are not able to access their classes because they don't have some online facility, mobile phones or whatever. But the fallout of all this is also very troubling in the sense that there is evidence to suggest that the number of children who have gone into child labor has increased because of COVID. So on the one hand, education is not being offered to them, or if it is being offered, it's not available to them in that sense of, digital divide. So they're being pushed into child labor because of the poverty of their parents. There's also increasing evidence of child marriages. I would, look at child marriages as a form of child sexual abuse, because the children are actually young girls. Many of them are being sold off into marriage. And many of them, at the age of 14, 15, 16, get pregnant, don't know what to do with the child. There's nobody to look after them. So these are, several facets of the problems that children face. We've also had problems of what are called COVID orphans. So you have children whose parents have died. One parent has died. In many cases, both the parents have died. There is no support. Many of them come from poor families, and for them to live with some relative, it's a burden on the relatives as well. So they're not welcome with the relatives. So there are, several kinds of problems, and then, things get compounded. There is one problem, and then you add to that another problem, then you add to that a third problem, and so on. And these are things that we need to think about. We need to realize that there are problems that are being faced by children. Some of them are made by us. Others are made by things which are beyond our control, like COVID, for example. But if you have a problem of COVID, then there is a fallout. So I think society has to be prepared for that. So there are a variety of issues that need to be looked at in conjunction with, of course, child sexual abuse, and in conjunction with enactments like POCSO and so on. Now, you see, if you look at child sexual abuse, the research has shown that the number of cases of child sexual abuse may have been decreasing in one sense, but I'm not very sure, how reliable those figures are, because what happens is that there is a tendency in the police not to register cases. There is also a tendency in the families of the victims or the survivors of child sexual abuse to keep it under wraps. Otherwise there is a social problem, stigma, and so on and so forth. So really, one can't be sure about the accuracy of the data available. There is also evidence to suggest, and Huck has done some excellent work along with the Civic Data Lab, to show that the number of POCSO cases has been increasing since 2012, when the act came into force. Now, this is very worrying, you see, because there is, I feel, there's really no justice that is done to a child or to the family of the child if a person accused of, sexual assault or aggravated sexual assault, penetrative sexual assault, is punished after 4 or 5 years. But that's only at the first level. Then you have an appeal and so on, and then the whole thing goes into a complete spin. So really, in that sense, even in POCSO cases, because of the large number of pending cases, justice, as one would expect, is not being done to the victims or to the survivors of child sexual abuse. That is one aspect of it. Now, what is the judiciary trying to do to ensure that justice is delivered quickly to children? One of the things that is being done, and which is, I think, a standard formula, which again doesn't work, is to increase the number of courts. So Delhi, for example, has got something like 31 courts that are dealing with POCSO cases, dealing with cases of child sexual abuse. But in spite of that, in spite of the fact that there are 31 cases that are 31 courts that are dealing with all this, you still have a rising number of cases. So how many judges are you going to appoint? I mean, if 31 is not good enough, are you going to appoint 50? Are you going to appoint 75? Or are you going to do something to prevent child sexual abuse, number one? Number two, do something to speed up the justice delivery system. Prevention of child sexual abuse is not easy, because again, statistics have shown that a majority of the persons who are guilty of child sexual abuse persons who are closely connected somehow or the other with the survivor. It may be a relative, it may be a very close relative in the sense of a stepfather, it may be neighbors, but persons who are known to the survivor. So really, I think there is a huge amount of awareness that has to be generated, and I think this is one of the areas of concern. Um, Children should be told, I don't know how it's going to be done, but they should be told to come out and speak, at least to their parents or to some persons who are close to them, maybe in a school, maybe in the family, about an incident that has happened. Unless this comes out, unless the children have the confidence that their disclosure is going to lead to some positive result, uh, you know, I don't think we are going to make sufficient progress. There is also tied up with this is the awareness of what is child sexual abuse. Now, if it's a small child, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, there are instances of girls as young as 4, 5, 6, 7 getting raped. They perhaps, first of all, are not in a position to understand what is happening, and even if they are in a position to understand what is happening, they are not able to explain what has happened, explain in a manner that will be intelligible to an adult or to a person who could be, a professional like a doctor or a nurse, or somebody who can take some action on this. So it's a very complex sort of an issue, and frankly, you have a tough task ahead of you in terms of, first of all, disclosure, and second of all, providing awareness on what is child sexual abuse. Then the next thing that comes is the actual handling of the cases. So you have persons who can go to court, they can go to the police. The police does not sometimes register these kind of cases. They say, it's something that is within the family. Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to do that? There'll be social stigma and so on and so forth. So the case never gets reported. That's why I'm not very confident about the data that is generated either by the NCRB or by any other government agency. One doesn't really know what exactly has happened. But assuming that the police register a case, they register an FIR, they investigate, file a case, and so on and so forth. I had mentioned to you the time that it takes. Again, a study that was conducted by Huck and by Civic Data Lab shows that the average time that is taken to decide a case is more than 1 year. And there are instances of cases that have remained pending for 5 years, 6 years, even in a place like Delhi, which has got 31 courts. So really, if justice has to be done, it has to be done speedily. And it is possible. It is possible to do to deliver justice speedily. You will recall that there was an incident of mass child sexual abuse in Muzaffarpur in a shelter home, and the persons who were accused of the offense were influential people, and ultimately the Supreme Court transferred the case to Delhi and said that it should be expedited. Out of 20 accused persons, if I remember correctly, 19 of them were convicted. Hearings were held virtually on a day-to-day basis, and within a year, the trial was over. All the witnesses were examined, and sentences awarded. What I'm trying to say is that it is possible. So the idea is, how do you make it possible? So that's the second challenge. The first one, of course, being the disclosure and providing awareness and knowledge to children. Second is getting a case registered, FIR registered, case registered, and to ensure that justice is done through an expeditious disposal of the case. And then, of course, following it up, maybe there might be an appeal and so on and so forth. But as long as there is closure at least one level, there is this feeling that well, things have come to a head at some point of time, and one has to get on with whatever has to be done so far as the case is concerned, and with life moving on. There are also issues which I think is a part of the awareness, that will have to be looked at not only from the point of view of what is child sexual abuse, but the awareness of the fact that children are entitled to compensation if there is a case of child sexual abuse. Children are entitled to support persons. Children are entitled to counseling. We don't look at that at all, forget about looking at it seriously. We don't seem to be concerned about it. There are a large number of cases that are pending before the state legal services authorities for providing compensation to a survivor of child sexual abuse. I believe that rather than quantifying or rather than asking the state legal services authority or the district legal services authority to quantify the compensation that has to be given, it should be the duty of the court to quantify the compensation, to provide for interim compensation in appropriate cases, and also to provide for adequate compensation during the trial or after conviction. Why is it necessary for the court to do it? Because the court is aware of the full facts of the case. They know what is happening. The judge knows what is happening. The judge is recording evidence. The judge is seeing the witnesses. Instead of, the judge is also delivering sentence that, all right, you go to jail for 5 years, you go to jail for 7 years, or you go to jail for life, depending upon the nature of the offense. Why should that compensation aspect be transferred to the state legal services authority? I'm not able to understand the logic behind it. So that's again a challenge, of the awareness that has to be given to children, to the family of the survivors. And of course, things like support persons, we don't talk about it. The courts just say, all right, we'll appoint somebody as a support person. Now that support person has to be somebody who knows what is to be done. A counselor has to be a person who knows counseling. It's not that, you can just pick up any person and say, all right, you be a support person, or you be a counselor, or you be somebody who can, be a sort of a guardian to the child. It can't be like that. There has to be some study behind this. There has to be some awareness. There has to be some knowledge on the part of the judges, on the part of the prosecution, on the part of the family, the defense, and so on. So really, these are, challenges that you have in terms of awareness at various levels. So when you're talking about child safety, it's not only prevention, that's one aspect. If you can prevent it, excellent. But like I said, there are problems in that. And should such an unfortunate event happen, then of course there are, other challenges that have to be overcome. The other aspect that I think we need to look at, in a somewhat broader perspective of child sexual abuse, is the use of the internet or the use of computers. Again, during the COVID, it has been shown that instances of child pornography have increased, right? And that is again very disturbing. So it's not only, when you're talking about child sexual abuse, or when you're talking about POXO, it's not only physical, it can also be through the internet. It can be digital child sexual abuse. And that can be, pretty traumatizing as well. Perhaps it can be even worse, because child sexual abuse, if it's in a physical, well, maybe it's one to one, or maybe it's more than one to one. But when you're talking about child pornography on the net, when you're talking about child sexual abuse on the net, it's open to everybody. It's not only limited to a few persons. It's depending upon what the person intends. It could be made available to hundreds of people. There is morphing of images. So a child who doesn't know what's going on, the image of that child can be morphed and circulated on the net, on WhatsApp, among friends in school. And this has happened. It's not something which is coming recently. It has happened that images are being circulated in schools on WhatsApp. So that's also a form of child sexual abuse. May not be physical, but certainly mental, and equally, if not more, traumatic. Are we looking at that also? Are we thinking about digital child sexual abuse, if one was to use an expression to define that? How do you get support persons for that? How do you get counseling for that? So these are areas that we need to look at somewhat seriously. I had mentioned about child marriages. Again, there is an increase in the number of child marriages in some areas, but overall it's coming down, which is very good. But there have been instances of children being sold. Why? Because of poverty, and because you have traffickers who are pretty well organized. I came across a case, I read about it in the newspapers, about a girl from Tripura who had been married off to somebody from Rajasthan, from one end of India to the other end. Now, married off, I don't know whether it was a child marriage or whether it was a part of trafficking. But later on, it came to be known that this girl was actually sold to these people to this family in Rajasthan. The girl was about maybe 13 or 14. She became pregnant. She was being harassed in the house, and she left the house and was wandering around in the streets when she was picked up by the police. And they recorded her statement and came to the conclusion that she had been trafficked. She was from Tripura, did not know Hindi very well. Her, spoken language was Bangla. But somehow the other, the police was able to piece things together. And this reporter picked it up and, said that she is from Tripura, and this is what has happened to her. So I then wrote to the Chief Justice of the Tripura High Court and asked him to take it up as a public interest litigation, which the Chief Justice did. And the girl was sent back to Tripura. I mean, arrangements were made through the state government. But the interesting thing is that when she came back, her parents refused to accept her. Why? Because they said that we have sold her off, and if she comes back, then we will have to return the money, which we cannot. So these are kinds of challenges that you have. Now, this was, you could call it child marriage, you could also call it child sexual abuse. So you have issues of trafficking, you have issues of child marriages, you have issues of child pornography on the net, and so on. So these, I think, have to be looked at in the larger perspective. Solutions found. Earlier, I had referred to disclosure, providing awareness to the children, what is happening to them, and of course, subsequent events like bringing the offenders to book. So it's a huge challenge, and I think it would be, worth everybody's while if all of you can get together and make sure that you are able to do something positive One, for reducing the crime, and two, if the crime is committed, justice is given to the survivors. Thank you very much, and all the best to all of you.